Okay, so we're still in Romans 4, and we're still talking about what it means to have a proper faith, and we're continuing on right now in verse 13. So please turn to that. Here we go. Verse 13. Clearly God's promise to give the whole earth to Abraham and his descendants was based not on his obedience to God's law, but on a right relationship with God that comes by faith. If God's promise is only for those who obey the law, then faith is not necessary, and the promise is pointless. For the law always brings punishment on those who try to obey it. The only way to avoid breaking the law is to have no law to break. So the promise is received by faith. It is given as a free gift, and we are all certain to receive it, whether or not we live according to the law of Moses, if we have faith like Abraham's. For Abraham is the father of all who believe. That is what the scriptures mean when God told him, I have made you the father of many nations. This happened because Abraham believed in the God who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing. So we previously talked about faith in regards to works and how our foundation and the start of our relationship with God is not based on what we're producing. We talked about how our foundation in relationship with God does not begin at the act of circumcision, just like it didn't with Abraham and his descendants. And so now Paul goes on to speak to the Jews about their tendency to want the law to be in place of faith. So the Jews, once again, those bad Jews back then, they were not remembering, again, correctly. So what came first, the law or Abraham? Abraham, and like hundreds of years before. So they're forgetting that Abraham's relationship with God was not based on the law, and God, dubbing Abraham right, or, is not based on that. So they're, again, not remembering their lineage and history correctly, and they're wanting to take a false doctrine and place it in replacement of faith. And they're wanting to treat their relationship with God like some sort of, legality or something, some sort of legal contract that as long as they, hit this, and this, and this, and this, then we're good with God. But that's not what our relationship with God is set up as, and he uses Abraham again to point that out to the Jews. Abraham didn't have a checklist of things he needed to follow, and in fact, by their standards, Abraham probably would have failed. Like Abraham, when he was first going out and journeying out like God called him to, he multiple times, was insecure, at least, with his wife and the emperors and stuff that were, that he was, going into their land and saying, and what that brought to them, he was bringing harsh things upon them because of his insecurity. So by the Jew standard, their father, their big whatever you want to use, Grand Poobah, he sucked according to their standard. But fortunately for them and for us, that's not what makes us right with God. And Paul wants to really emphasize that because they're using all these different things to replace that. And they're wanting to use the law as a checklist, and that, again, fortunately for them, is not what what our relationship with God is based in, because are we capable of fulfilling the law? Nope, we're not. We suck at it. When we add all these rules to our lives and try to follow them, we only fail, and the law only pointed that out to the Jews of how they were not meeting the mark, how they were falling short. And the law only brings, like consequence and wrath. So fortunately for the Jews, and for us, that's not what we're seeking. I was reading a couple different versions of this passage, and I can't remember exactly, but in place of promise, the word guarantee is used. I don't know if it says that in any of your guys' versions or what you're using, but I think there's an interesting distinction there, because when you hear the word guarantee, you think about it in those terms of legality and law, like thinking of any sort of like product or something, satisfaction guarantee, or if you don't like it, then we're required to give you something back or something, and that's not what our relationship with God is. We are to believe in our hearts that He is who He says He is, that He does what He says He'll do, that He'll make things impossible, or turn the impossible possible, and again uses Abraham to demonstrate that. Abraham was, crusty old man. Didn't think he was able to have kids, and his wife's womb was, all shriveled up. But, because Abraham believed, God blessed him and showed him that, even despite all of those things, all the outward evidence, God makes those things possible. And that's the kind of faith we have. We're not supposed to attempt, again, the law is bad, not bad, but the law is bad in this vein because we can't follow it fully, and because it only points out our shortcomings. But even if we were able to, we're not supposed to be, waving this document to God saying, look, I've done it, look, I've done it. And he says that in the beginning of the chapter, that through our, about works, that even if we had good works, then we would have something to boast about. Paul says the contrary, really. And then about that same thing about our faith, even when we have faith and we've accepted that, we're not supposed to, we're not supposed to think that we're entitled to whatever, it's like I was saying with the guarantee, your satisfaction guaranteed. We're not entitled to waving that in God's face, saying now I'm good, now I'm made right with you, so make sure I'm taken care of, okay? That's not what we're called to. Trying to find my place. And then there's the matter of, I mentioned earlier, how they're sort of retconning history, and how if that's how God operated, how chaotic that would be, because He declared Abraham righteous by faith. How could they then say that we're declared righteous by fulfilling the law? God doesn't just flip the script at any old time. That's not the God we know, and that's not the consistent God that we know. God says that we enter into a right relationship with Him first through faith. Then all these things follow, but we're talking about first through faith. God is not, chaotic in that manner, and He doesn't He doesn't change who he is, and he doesn't, he doesn't just give us that chaos, because then, what are we supposed to do with that? He gives us direction. And then he ends, at least in verse 17, this is what the scriptures say, when God told him, I have made you the father of many nations. This happened because Abraham believed in God, who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing. So he uses Abraham as that example, but we're given the ultimate example in that in Christ. What better way to show that than taking someone who was dead and raising him? So we get to use Christ as our focal point in that, and our matter of faith in believing that and following him in that. Short and sweet. It's been a crazy week, but I appreciate you guys struggling through this with me, but I have a couple questions. Like the Jews binded themselves to this false not doctrine, but they binded themselves to the law in becoming and entering into a right relationship with God. Are there things that you either impose on yourself or feel like are imposed on you by people, that you think you have to meet? What sort of things have you heard out there as far as that goes? Can you think of a time when God demonstrated in your life, like he did with Abraham, just his, power, how he turned something impossible, and how he, even through all the outward evidence of that, proved that he could, do, and how did that, change your perception of him, and do you remember that in those times when, even through outward evidence, that points to no, God says and God does differently? Do you treat your relationship with God or your relationship with people in those terms of legality? We use social contract theory as a fallback term for how people treat each other, but do you treat your relationships that way, or are your relationships based in faith? And what does that mean? Thanks. Please discuss.